Welcome to today's episode of Spec Stepping, where we are stepping through the API spec. And in today's episode, we're going to cover the Fetch API. This API is fairly mature. It's been around for a little bit. I've been using it for several years. But for those of you that may or may not have been around prior to the Fetch API, when this came out, it made making AJAX requests much easier because that's what the Fetch API does. It makes it easy for us to take JavaScript and say, okay, let me go and fetch and grab this information from a server, an external third-party server, some API. Maybe it's your own API that you built, but you're hitting the server side. We used to use the XHR request, the XML HTTP request, and you could still use it, but I don't recommend it because Fetch is so much easier. It deals with promises and things like that. So it uses modern techniques to grab information from a server. So this one is everywhere. So you don't have to worry about it not being available. It's all over the place. So you can read through the documentation, but let me jump to the demo and then I'll walk through the code a little bit. So here, let me just open up there. So here I have just UX that has just a little demo. So I'm demoing, I'm hitting a dummy API with some test information, that sort of thing. So you'll see the response output here and back, let me do it like this. So fetch user success, it goes and grabs. So it was fetching the user ID. It retrieved this JSON object of a Leanne Graham. It brings back information. And then if I do a 404, it'll return back an error 404. And then I can also do a post. So you can do all sorts of, you can do gets, posts, puts, deletes, all sorts of things with this fetch. It's really, really handy to do this. Now, let me show you, just jump to the code and show you kind of how I did this. So just like in some other demos I've given, the HTML is pretty rudimentary. I just have some buttons I'm using to trigger the calls. And then I just have an output where I'm just dumping to the screen in addition to the console. Styles, nothing really fancy, just to make it look a little prettier than just normal HTML black and white. But here is where the Fetch API really shines, is in the code itself. So first of all, I'm grabbing the output so I can dump it to there. This here, this base URL, this is the URL I'm hitting with many of my requests. So this is just a site out there, and there's many of these out there that you can hit that just gives you like some dummy data just to play with. So I'm just hitting it just to give us some information back because I didn't want to have to build a back end, to be honest with you. So then I have this little helper that just takes the JSON that comes back from the API call from the fetch and stringifies it so I can put it in the output. So that's what actually puts it the output. So it's just a helper. So I just call that when I get the information back. So the first one, a basic GET request. So here I'm just doing an async request. This fetch user is tied to that button. And you'll see it says fetching user ID, whatever the user ID is I'm calling on the console log. Here is the actual fetch right here, the API. So I need to put in it what I'm calling. So I'm calling this base URL and I'm appending to it users and a user ID to get that information back. So whenever you're using this, if you're hitting a third-party API, and everybody has an API nowadays. So whenever you're hitting it, you just need to read through their documentation to understand what are the endpoints, URLs that you need to hit. Now, I'm not going to get into this at a great detail here, but on many of these calls, if you're hitting third party, you usually have to send through, usually there's JWTs, JavaScript Web Tokens, some sort of bearer token, for security purposes. I'm not dealing with that here because I just want to deal with the fetch itself, the actual fetching of the data. But you are probably going to have to pass along some HTTP headers when you're doing this in a production app. And those one of those main headers, excuse me, one of those main headers is a bearer token so that they can verify you are who you are and that you're nobody doing anything malicious. So just a tip for you. There might be some other headers you have to pass on, like maybe it might be an API that if you're doing a post, it requires form data. It might be JSON data, things like that. Little sip of coffee here. Now, Um, so here I'm just doing that fetch and I'm just using async await and it's going to store in this response constant. Now here, you usually want to do some checks to see if it's successful or not. So if the call wasn't successful, you probably want to throw an error, handle it gracefully, maybe log it, that sort of thing. Otherwise, you want to take it and run the JSON method to turn it into JSON, store it in the user data, and then I'm just logging it out, but you would manipulate it, do whatever you need to do in your application. So let me just shift back here and I'm just going to refresh. And so here I just click, let me get rid of some of those errors. Click fetch and fetching user ID 1 and it retrieved it and just dumped it to the screen. Okay. So if I go back, let me just jump down to here. Here's the event listeners, and I'm looking for, where did I do that? Oh, right here. So I'm listening for a click on button success, outputting fetching user ID 1. Here's where I'm actually calling and sending through my ID for fetch user, and I'm just calling that helper method to log it out. All these are basically the same methods. It's just one is I'm hitting a success button, one's the error button, one's a post button. So that's these three. This is success, error, post. So I'm just have some event listeners I just add to the click and passing along what I'm needing to. So here, fetch user is 9999. It's going to throw an error because there is no user 9999. And then I can handle that error. So up here, let me go back up to fetch user. So fetch operation failed and it should output an error. So let me just refresh to clear my screen. Fetching it. There, it does not exist. So I got a 404, which is exactly what I expected to get. So I would probably, if this were a production application, I'd probably put in some more robust try catching here. You know, if this were a 404, probably give some more information because normal users don't know what a 404 is, and give them some information. Probably log that to a database somewhere. So maybe send off a notification, hey, there is an issue on the website, that sort of thing, just so we can catch those bugs and handle them the way we need to handle them. Now, the last one is a post here. We're creating a post. So let me just show that one here. So again, I'm doing an async await and I'm sending through the title and the body. So imagine you're like posting to a blog or something like that. Almost every form submission is going to be a post. Now, granted, if you're updating something, it's probably going to be a put request, but mostly you're going to use post. So get and post are probably the two most often verbs, HTTP verbs you use. So here I'm just getting to the base URL and grabbing the posts. And then like I said earlier about sending header data, when you're doing a post, you usually have to send header data along with that too. Again, you probably will need a bearer token if you're doing this for a real third-party API. You need to tell it that it's a method of post. Now, the reason I didn't have to do that up here is because it assumes get unless I tell it the config method is different than that. So here I'm doing method post. I have some headers where I'm doing JSON data, or you could do form content, that sort of thing, depending on what the API requires. And usually forms, if you're posting, you need to send the body of the form that you're sending to that third-party service. Here I'm just stringifying the title, the body, and the user ID. So down here, so that's all kind of scaffolding of setting up my call. Here's what I'm doing the call. So I have the URL, just like a get, but here notice I'm passing the second parameter, which is the configuration. Now, I could do that up here with my get request if I wanted to. I just didn't need to because I wasn't passing through any special headers. It was assuming get, so I didn't need to do that. So it makes the code smaller. But I could definitely do that, like if I needed to pass on a bearer token, which is, like I said, pretty common. So here, I'm passing those configuration options in the second parameter. I do my check to make sure it returns okay. I store my result from the await, and then I'm just console logging it out and returning the result so it can be posted in down here in the text content of the data. So if I go back here, refresh, click create post, it's creating a post, and boom, I posted it and it returned what the ID is from the demo content. So doing a fetch once you understand the logic, it's a piece of cake, and it was one of the most handy methods because I I don't think I've ever built an application, at least a modern application within the last 10 years, that a web app that is, that has not consumed a third-party app. So I'm constantly reading APIs to see, okay, how do I do gets, posts, puts, deletes, whatever I need. I need to read that documentation, and I always use fetch since it came out because it's so much easier than an XHR request. So now, one related note, if you're ever debugging these, because depending on the complexity, it may be a little bit weird to debug, or you may have some difficulties. So I'm just going to do a refresh here, and I'm going to then just clear out my network tab. So if you have not used the network tab, if you're newer to doing web development, this is one of your best friends. Every time I have it constantly open when I'm doing development, just so I can use the tools that are in there. That's for another video, but I just wanted to show you if I do a fetch, see there, it did a fetch right here. This is my fetch request right here. So if I'm ever having issues, I can go in and find out the issues. So here it tells me what headers went through and all that stuff. It gives me a preview of what came back, and it gives me actually a formatted response if I want to do that. So let me show you one with an error here. Clear that out. I'm going to click fetch user error, and see here it errored out. It tells me it's a 404, and then I can go into the headers and see some information as to why. So whenever I'm doing fetches, especially, I use this tab because if I ever have to debug, it's pretty handy to use. So I just wanted to show you that quick as a side note. So if you have any questions, let me know, and if not, happy stepping.